It began with silence, not the kind you hear, but the kind that presses against your thoughts. The kind that lives between stars, where even light takes years to whisper home. Somewhere beyond Neptune's orbit, something moved. A dim point of light gliding across the dark. Quiet, cold, and for a while completely ordinary. But as it drifted closer, that silence began to change, almost like it carried a rhythm waiting to be heard. Welcome to Science Reshaped, where we look beyond the data and listen to what the universe is trying to tell us. If stories like this spark your curiosity, mysteries that begin with numbers but end with wonder, then subscribe and stay with me, because what you're about to hear may change how we see everything we thought we knew about space. It started with one frame of data. A telescope in Hawaii picked up a faint streak cutting through an image of the distant sky. The automated software flagged it as non-bound, meaning it wasn't orbiting the sun. It was just passing through, another traveler from the dark between stars. Astronomers called it 3I Atlas, the third interstellar object ever observed by humanity. Another visitor, another speck of ancient ice and dust. Nothing to lose sleep over. But even before the first calculations were complete, something about it felt wrong. The early light readings came back steady, too steady. Every time telescopes locked on, the brightness shifted with uncanny precision. A rise and fall that repeated over and over again. Not like the chaotic flicker of a spinning rock, but like a pulse, a rhythm, almost alive. At first, scientists blamed the instruments. They recalibrated their optics, cross-checked sensors, compared timestamps. But when observatories in Chile, Japan, and Europe confirmed the same pattern, the coincidence disappeared. This object wasn't behaving like anything in our catalogue. Comets are messy. They tumble, fracture, and shed material as sunlight hits their frozen surfaces. But Atlas refused to follow the rules. Its light curve was too clean, its motion too exact. Even as it approached the inner solar system, its trajectory remained perfectly smooth. No visible jets, no fragments, no random bursts of dust. It just kept moving, calm and silent, as if it already knew where it was going. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory ran the numbers again. They traced the path backward, calculating where it might have come from. The answer pointed toward the direction of the constellation Lyra, the same region where, decades earlier, radio astronomers had detected the famous "wow" signal. It was almost poetic, but science doesn't believe in poetry. Not until the data leaves no other choice. Weeks passed. The world barely noticed. A few headlines mentioned a new interstellar comet, and then the story vanished under more earthly noise. But for the scientists watching night after night, the sense of unease kept growing. Because in their graphs, something was speaking. Not in words, not in signals, but in the language of light itself. The intervals between peaks were too uniform, too intentional. The pulse didn't drift or fade with distance. It held steady, as though something aboard 3I Atlas was keeping time. Infrared telescopes joined the effort. If this was ice reflecting sunlight, the temperature should have changed predictably as it neared the sun. But it didn't. Instead of heating steadily, it fluctuated, rising, then dropping, almost as if the object was regulating itself. One night it would glow faint and cold. The next, it would blaze with unexpected warmth before cooling again. That kind of behavior didn't belong to any known material or natural body. Some thought of metal alloys, others wondered about artificial coatings. No one said it out loud yet, but the question hung in the room. Could something be controlling it? Still, science moves cautiously. Every unexplained result must face the possibility of error, so they checked again. But the more carefully they looked, the stranger it became. The spectrum of light reflected off Atlas showed an unusual pattern. Sharp, reflective peaks in the wavelengths associated with metals, not frozen gases or dust. The reading suggested a surface smoother than any comet ever recorded. Smooth enough to act almost like a mirror, and yet it never blinked in radio. No signal, no transmission, just that rhythmic brightness. A visual heartbeat crossing millions of kilometers of space. Some began to call it the silent pulse. Others refused to name it at all, because naming a mystery too early makes it feel real. As Atlas continued its slow journey toward the sun, the data became clearer. The intervals of brightness now aligned perfectly with its rotational predictions, except the rotation speed didn't match the light pattern. In other words, the object was turning, but the pulses weren't coming from any single face. They came from all directions at once, like an omnidirectional beacon. At that point, The disbelief turned to quiet fascination. Something about this rock, this piece of interstellar debris, didn't want to behave like debris. It acted more like an instrument. Not mechanical, perhaps, but deliberate. And though no one would dare publish that theory, everyone who stared at the data long enough felt it. The sense that we were not just observing a thing, but something performing. Meanwhile, in the public domain, amateur astronomers began uploading their own images of 3I Atlas, tiny streaks of light across black fields. Some reported strange rhythmic flickers in their exposures, even with basic equipment, patterns that matched the professional observatories. Within weeks, online forums buzzed with speculation. What if it's signaling? Someone wrote. What if it's a probe? Another replied. Most dismissed it as fantasy. But curiosity has a way of spreading faster than skepticism, and through it all, Atlas kept moving, drifting silently through the ecliptic plane, reflecting sunlight in perfect cadence. The pulse didn't fade, the rhythm didn't break. Even as it entered regions where comets usually flare with volatile gases, Atlas stayed cold. No tail, no jets, just light, precise, measured, unwavering. By now the astronomers were divided. Half insisted there had to be a natural explanation, maybe a resonance effect, maybe a peculiar rotation axis. The other half stared at the numbers and quietly wondered if nature had ever built anything so precise before. Because somewhere between those repeating flashes of light and the flawless stability of its orbit, something felt undeniably intentional. And that's where this story begins to bend. Because what you're hearing isn't science fiction, it's data. Real observations logged by real telescopes across the planet. No lasers, no signals, no clear answers, just a silence too perfect to ignore. Every great mystery begins the same way, not with a shout, but with a whisper. And 3I Atlas was whispering something into the dark. As it moved closer to the sun, its rhythm grew stronger. Each pulse arrived seconds earlier, as if responding to its changing position. The pattern evolved, subtle, but measurable. And somewhere in those numbers, the idea began to take shape that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a visitor at all. Maybe it was something sent. But before anyone could prove it, something unexpected happened. The pulse changed. It doubled, then stopped. Complete silence. For a moment, the world's instruments saw nothing but static. Then, just before data flatlined completely, one final spike appeared, brighter than anything before. A burst of light so intense it overloaded sensors across 3 observatories, and then, nothing. The object continued on its path as if nothing had happened. Calm, quiet, steady once more. What caused that burst? Why did it appear only once? Was it a natural flare, or something else entirely? No one could say, not yet. But one thing was clear, the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of questions, and somewhere out there, far beyond the reach of any probe, 3I Atlas kept gliding inward, still silent, still perfect, and still very much alive in the minds of everyone watching. Because sometimes, the scariest thing about space isn't what we don't know. It's when something looks back and refuses to tell us why. For days, it was nothing but numbers. Columns of light-curve data streaming in from observatories around the world. But somewhere inside that ocean of numbers, a pulse was hiding, steady, rhythmic, impossible to ignore. At first, they thought it was an echo in the data, maybe an instrument artifact, maybe a software sync error. But when 3 different teams plotted their graphs separately and compared them later, they found the same strange heartbeat repeating at identical intervals, once every 12 minutes. No random flicker, no chaotic flare. Just a slow, patient rhythm glowing through the dark. It didn't drift with rotation. It didn't shift with distance. It was locked in time, as if the universe itself was keeping beat with it. That realization spread quietly through the astronomy community. Scientists don't panic easily. They verify, they doubt. But beneath that calm process, something else began to stir. Curiosity mixed with unease, because comets don't pulse like that. Ice doesn't know rhythm. Every night, telescopes from Chile, Hawaii, and Japan pointed toward the same section of sky, waiting for the next flash. And right on schedule it came, 12 minutes. Again and again. The signal wasn't strong enough to be radio. It wasn't communication in any known sense. It was light, reflected sunlight, modulated somehow, repeating with mathematical precision. They checked for known causes, a binary rotation, a twin-lobed shape like a dumbbell spinning in sunlight. But models showed that would produce uneven peaks, not perfectly identical ones. Others tested whether sunlight passing through a venting jet could mimic a pulse. The math didn't fit. The intervals were too exact, accurate to the second. It was as if something on or inside 3i Atlas was controlling its reflectivity. Night after night, the brightness graphs looked like a heartbeat monitor. Up, down, clean and deliberate. The data team at the European Southern Observatory started calling it the pulse in the dark. The name stuck. Within weeks, the pulse became the center of every private discussion thread between astronomers. Emails, encrypted chats, late-night video calls. Everyone trying to explain what they were seeing without sounding irrational. Some suggested a rotating mirror-like surface, possibly a geometric shard left from a larger body. But then came the next anomaly. When they mapped the axis of rotation, it didn't match the direction of the pulses. The flashes weren't tied to any face or angle of the object. They came from all directions equally, like an omnidirectional beacon. If it was a shard, it was doing something no natural shard could do. One researcher at Caltech ran a brightness simulation assuming active reflection, as if the object had moving panels adjusting themselves to sunlight. The model matched the data perfectly. It was a disturbing fit. He deleted the file before posting the result. Meanwhile, as Atlas moved closer to the sun, the rhythm changed subtly. The 12-minute cycle shortened by fractions of a second, perfectly corresponding to the decreasing distance between Atlas and Earth. That meant the timing wasn't random. It was aware, or at least reactive. Something was adjusting for distance. By now, the object had entered the ecliptic plane. Every major observatory was watching it. Even the Hubble telescope caught faint signatures of reflected blue and gold light in alternating sequence. Colors that suggested structured reflection rather than diffuse scattering. The object, roughly the size of a football field, was now bright enough to track continuously, yet no tail appeared. No gas jets, no trail of dust. It wasn't melting, even as sunlight grew harsher. And still, the pulse continued, perfect, unwavering, like a cosmic metronome counting down to something none of them could name. During one night of observation, the pulse briefly intensified. The amplitude tripled, then returned to normal. The data team in Madrid thought it might have been a lens flare, but when they checked against data from Mauna Kea, the same spike appeared there. Same second, same shape. That single synchronized surge sent a chill through every lab involved. It meant the pulse wasn't a local effect. It was real. Somewhere between Earth and the orbit of Mars, 3i Atlas was doing something deliberate. Speculation grew bolder. Could it be tumbling metal, a fragment of a long-dead probe from another civilization? Could solar heating cause periodic reflections through internal cavities? Could magnetic flux cause a rhythm of plasma discharges? Each theory solved one piece and broke three others. A few scientists refused to let go of the idea that it might be artificial. They didn't say it in public, but their private notes revealed a quiet fascination with the precision, the way the timing never wavered, the way each flare looked identical to the last. It felt engineered, but in science, feeling means nothing. They needed proof. Then came the turning point, the night the pulse vanished. It didn't fade gradually, it stopped instantly. One cycle ended and then nothing. Flatline. Hours passed. Then days. No more pulses. Just steady reflected sunlight. At first, they thought the object had rotated in a way that hid the reflective surface, but orbital geometry didn't support that. Atlas wasn't tumbling. It was steady, as if holding still in its own invisible orientation. Somewhere in that silence, data analysts detected a faint, low-frequency oscillation hidden beneath the normal signal. It wasn't visible light this time. It was radio noise, too weak to decode, too structured to ignore, a whisper beneath the quiet. It repeated roughly every 36 hours. Long, slow hums spaced by near-perfect silence. That's when they realized the pattern might be changing modes. Light pulses had stopped, but something deeper had replaced them. The discovery sent another wave of confusion through the community. Had Atlas switched frequencies, or were the instruments simply detecting resonance from solar radiation pressure? The deeper they looked, the stranger it became. The hum seemed to drift across frequencies, like a faint heartbeat searching for a new rhythm. Then, almost exactly 3 Earth days after the last light pulse, a final flash appeared, brighter than anything before. It lasted less than 1/10 of a second, but outshone every previous reading combined. It was so intense that several sensors temporarily saturated, and after that, total silence. No hum, no light pulse, nothing but the cold reflection of a distant traveler continuing its path toward the sun. For the scientists, the event was electrifying. They had watched an interstellar object emit a perfectly rhythmic sequence of light for weeks, stop without warning, release a massive final burst, and then go dark. Every known physical explanation strained under that pattern. No random venting, no rotation alignment, no simple reflection. The object had behaved like a system, one that started, adjusted, paused, and ended. In the following days, the word signal started to slip into conversation. Not officially, never in press releases, but whispered between researchers after long nights in the control rooms. Could it be a transmission? If so, who was it for? The hum detected in radio wasn't strong enough to reach deep space. It was almost as if the object was emitting inward, into the solar system, instead of out. That idea unsettled everyone who considered it. When the story eventually reached a few journalists, it was buried under technical disclaimers. Anomalous reflection, thermal oscillation, observational artifact. The public moved on, but the scientists didn't. In every new observation, in every recalibrated data set, the same question waited quietly beneath the noise. What if the pulse had meaning? Because the more they studied it, the more deliberate it looked. Even the timing of its silence fit too perfectly, ceasing exactly as it crossed a key gravitational resonance point between Mars and Earth's orbit, a place where space itself hums with tidal balance. The object didn't just pass through that zone. It paused there. No one wanted to say what that implied, because to admit it meant accepting something that science still has no vocabulary for. For now, the official records call it a reflection anomaly, a mystery of geometry and light. But off the record, among those who watch the data unfold in real time, the phrase still lingers in quiet emails and late-night calls. The pulse wasn't just in the data, it was in the dark itself, and whatever created it knew we were watching. When the light went silent, the world of astronomy didn't sleep. Every telescope that had tracked 3I Atlas was still turned toward it, waiting, listening, hoping for another pulse. But instead of light, something else began to change. At first it was subtle, a faint rise in infrared readings, barely above background noise. Then, hour by hour, the heat signatures grew stronger. Not blinding, not flaring like a comet near the sun. Just steady warmth, glowing from deep within the object itself. That made no sense. At its distance from the sun, Atlas should have been frozen solid, locked in ice colder than liquid nitrogen. Nothing that far out should warm up on its own. And yet, the data showed a clear rhythm in its temperature curve. Gentle peaks and valleys, repeating every few hours, perfectly synchronized across multiple observatories. No one wanted to say it, but everyone was thinking it. Atlas was heating itself. Thermal readings are usually easy to explain. As sunlight hits a rotating body, one side warms, the other cools. Simple physics. But this wasn't that. The warming didn't depend on the sun's angle, or distance, or rotation period. Sometimes the temperature rose while the object was in shadow. Sometimes it cooled, even as it moved closer to sunlight. It was behaving like something with internal control. In Chile, an astronomer named Dr. Ramos was the first to notice the pattern's symmetry. He plotted the thermal curve against time and saw something eerie. The peaks mirrored the earlier optical pulses, shifted forward by exactly 36 hours. It was as if the light had turned into heat, continuing the same hidden rhythm in a different form. When he shared the plot with colleagues, no one replied for hours. Then, one message arrived from a radio engineer working with another team. If it's repeating, it's not random. Check harmonic intervals. They did. And the temperature shifts followed a perfect harmonic ratio, one that mirrored the mathematical spacing used in acoustic resonance, like musical octaves. Cold space should not sing. Within days, infrared observatories from Arizona to Spain joined in. They all confirmed it. Every few hours, Atlas released faint but measurable bursts of heat. The emissions were uniform, clean, and somehow limited to specific wavelengths, as if filtered through engineered material. The object wasn't venting gas. There were no dust plumes, no volatile trails, no mechanical explosions. The warmth simply appeared, then faded, over and over again. A comet could do that only if it had trapped volatile layers deep inside, but even then, the pattern would be chaotic. This was not chaos, it was orchestration. By now, the phrase artificial thermal pattern started circulating quietly inside encrypted research channels. No one dared to publish it. No one wanted to ruin their career with a claim that sounded like science fiction. But the evidence kept piling up. Then came the biggest shock. Using data from a spacecraft near Venus, a team detected a secondary emission trailing behind Atlas. Faint microwaves that pulsed exactly between each thermal peak. Like a heartbeat's echo, that made scientists stop in their tracks. A natural object can radiate heat, yes, but to coordinate emissions across different frequencies, that required feedback, a system capable of regulating itself. In one midnight meeting, a physicist from Prague finally said what everyone else was avoiding. It's behaving like it's alive. No one answered him, because even if it wasn't biological, it was responding. It was regulating, adapting, controlling its own temperature against the sun's growing heat, as if protecting itself. By now, Atlas was approaching its closest point to the sun, the perihelion. Most interstellar visitors don't survive this stage. The heat rips them apart, vaporizing their icy cores into a trail of dust. But 3I Atlas didn't break. Its heat curve remained stable, climbing and dropping in exact intervals, like a body exhaling slowly in meditation. NASA's thermal instruments calculated its surface temperature at over 500 Kelvin, hotter than any cometary surface ever recorded, yet the object showed no sign of melting. No jets, no bright halo of evaporating ice. It looked solid, intact, almost metallic. The reflectivity confirmed it. The surface was shining like brushed steel, reflecting sunlight in hard, clean flashes instead of soft, powdery glows. Natural rock doesn't do that, ice doesn't either, and the heat coming from inside meant there was something generating energy beneath the surface, or releasing it in controlled bursts. One theory proposed trapped crystalline, hydrogen reacting to solar particles. Another suggested electromagnetic induction, a natural charging effect as it crossed the solar wind. But none of those explained the precision, the regularity of the pulses. It wasn't random chemistry, it was rhythm. The world still didn't know. Only a small network of researchers had access to the live data streams. They shared files through private servers, whispering over encrypted calls. Every time someone proposed a natural cause, another anomaly broke the explanation. At one point, they overlaid all the data, light, heat, and the faint radio hum, and saw something extraordinary. The timing across all three matched a single repeating mathematical constant, each peak aligned with a precise multiple of the hydrogen emission. Frequency, the same fundamental unit used in physics to define communication, it was the universal language scientists had always imagined another intelligence might use. Simple, mathematical, recognizable anywhere in the cosmos. But to admit that would be to step over a line science rarely crosses, so they stayed silent. Days later, the heat pulses changed again. Instead of rising and falling evenly, they began to cluster. 3 quick surges, a pause, then another 3. The rhythm was unmistakable. It looked like pattern encoding. Dr. Ramos stayed awake for 40 hours trying to decode it, running digital Fourier transforms, searching for meaning in the noise. What he found wasn't words, but a shape. When plotted on a 2-dimensional grid, the intensity pattern traced a curve, the outline of a spiral. It resembled the golden ratio, a natural coincidence maybe, but it felt intentional, almost poetic, like the object was revealing something ancient in its design. The discovery spread quietly across teams. Someone joked, "It's teaching math." No one laughed. Then, just as everyone was preparing for more data near perihelion, the thermal emissions collapsed. Flatline again. The object cooled, not gradually, but instantly. Within minutes, its temperature dropped hundreds of degrees, back to the level of deep space ice. Every model said that was impossible. Heat doesn't vanish in vacuum that fast. There was no venting, no radiation spike, no burst of energy leaving the object. It was as if the heat had simply turned off. Some called it a system shutdown. Others wondered if it had entered a dormant state, conserving energy before something larger. Whatever it was, the silence that followed felt different this time, heavier. For a moment, it was as if the object had finished speaking. But then, just before scientists closed their instruments for the night, Atlas flared again, not in heat, not in light, but in infrared patterns shaped like concentric rings expanding outward. Each ring expanded and faded at regular speed, like ripples spreading from a stone dropped in water. No one had ever seen anything like it. It wasn't dust, it wasn't gas, it was pure energy, low, uniform, measured. And the intervals between those ripples matched the earlier light pulses from weeks before. Atlas wasn't random, it was cycling through stages. Light, heat, silence, resonance, all tied together by one underlying clock. Whatever it wasn't just passing through. It was doing something deliberate. By the end of that week, a few scientists stopped calling it a comet altogether. In private papers, they used new terms: thermal machine, reflective oscillator, artificial interstellar body. But none of those labels truly fit, because machines are built to perform tasks. And Atlas, whatever it was, seemed to be performing something far beyond mechanical, something that felt almost ritualistic. As it drifted past the sun, unburned and unbroken, its internal warmth stabilized once again, gentle, calm, as if satisfied with the outcome of its own passage. It moved silently toward the outer planets, leaving behind no trail, no debris, only the faint memory of heat that should never have existed. And on every computer screen still tracking its path, the data ended the same way, a flat line of perfect equilibrium. No more peaks, no more pulses, just balance. A balance so precise, it looked less like death and more like waiting. Because somewhere out there, in the dark beyond Mars, 3i Atlas was still moving, silent, steady, untouched by the sun. And deep within that quiet body of metal and ice, something was still warm, not from sunlight, not from chemistry, but from intention. By the time the thermal data reached its final plateau, something had changed, not in space, but on Earth. Across research centers and observatories, the mood shifted from curiosity to quiet disbelief. The numbers no longer looked like natural behavior, they looked like engineering. For months, everyone had avoided that word, artificial. It carried too much weight, too much history, too much risk. But now, the data refused to be polite. When the thermal pulses lined up with the earlier light signals and the faint radio hum, they formed a single repeating pattern, like a system performing a sequence, a process, a routine. And that was when someone in the Jet Propulsion Laboratory finally said it out loud. What if it's not a comet at all? What if it's a machine? The sentence hung in the air. No one replied. Because to suggest design meant suggesting intent, and intent meant intelligence. In science, that kind of idea doesn't spark excitement, it sparks silence. Every theory that followed had to tiptoe around the word artificial, replacing it with gentler terms: non-random behavior, structured emission, self-consistent modulation. But everyone knew what they were really talking about. Atlas was acting like a system built to do something. The question was, what? Teams began re-examining every second of recorded data, this time not as astronomers, but as engineers. If Atlas were a device, how would it work? Where would its energy come from? What was it reacting to? When they mapped its thermal and reflective cycles together, they found something almost mechanical. Every 12-minute pulse of light corresponded to a long, slow curve of heat release, like a capacitor charging and discharging, energy building, then bleeding away in perfect rhythm. Someone compared it to a cooling loop in spacecraft systems, where excess energy is cycled out through radiators to maintain internal stability. Except this radiator was 100 meters wide and built into a rock that had traveled light years. It didn't just radiate heat, it regulated it. A physicist from MIT proposed the first full-scale simulation. He modeled Atlas as a hollow body with internal chambers, thin walls made of high reflectivity alloys, using solar flux to trigger periodic resonance. The simulation fit the data almost exactly. It was as if Atlas had panels, shutters, or surfaces that could open and close, controlling its temperature with precision, not randomly, not chaotically, deliberately. The implication hit everyone at once. If the object could regulate heat, it might be protecting something inside. But from what? The next clue came from magnetometer readings. As Atlas passed through regions of dense solar wind, sensors detected fluctuations in its magnetic signature, bursts of organized polarity reversing every 12 minutes, matching the light pulse interval. The polarity shifts were too symmetrical to be natural. The object was generating magnetic fields, and magnetic fields, at that strength, required motion of charged material, an internal current. That meant energy, and energy meant power. One engineer whispered what others were thinking. It's running. It wasn't just a drifting object reflecting sunlight. It was active. Something inside 3i Atlas was functioning, maybe decaying, maybe dormant, but still alive in the mechanical sense. Every rotation, every pulse, every fluctuation now looked like part of an automated process, the kind designed to survive deep time. And that was the moment the machine hypothesis was born. For the first time, scientists stopped treating Atlas like a visitor and started treating it like an artifact, a relic of purpose, built by someone or something that had reasons we couldn't yet guess. They divided into two camps. The first believed it was a probe, an ancient, self-sustaining device designed to collect data as it wandered through the galaxy. The second thought it was debris, a fragment of a much larger system long destroyed, still executing commands written eons ago. But neither camp could explain one thing. Why now? Why had it come alive again inside our solar system? Why had it pulsed only when under observation? Theories multiplied. Some said the light pulses were scanning bursts, a way to map local star systems. Others thought they were signaling attempts, handshakes meant for whoever sent it out. A few even suggested it was reacting to us. The pattern of its final flare, they noted, matched the time delay between its signal emission and our radio response to earlier interstellar objects, almost as if it had waited for a reply. And when none came, it shut down. That idea spread quietly through research threads. No one wanted to believe it, but the timing was undeniable. The object's last active pulse happened exactly 2 weeks after Earth's first coordinated radar scan aimed in its direction. 2 weeks, the time it would take for a signal to travel to Atlas and back. Coincidence, maybe, but coincidences had begun this story, and every one of them led deeper into the unknown. By mid-year, the machine hypothesis had leaked beyond scientific circles. An anonymous post on an astrophysics forum referenced non-random modulation in 3i Atlas, attaching a blurry image of a simulated internal structure. Within hours, conspiracy channels picked it up. "Alien probe confirmed," they shouted. Official agencies scrambled to contain it. Public statements dismissed the claims as misinterpretation of natural resonance, atmospheric interference, and data compression artifacts. Behind closed doors, though, meetings intensified. If there was even a 1% chance the object was technological, it was the most important discovery in human history. But there was a problem. Atlas was already leaving. By the time new deep space observatories aligned for higher resolution imaging, the object had passed its closest point to the sun and was moving outward fast, its path stable, its brightness fading. Whatever chance there was to study it up close was slipping away with every hour. A proposal to send a probe after it was drafted, but quickly shelved. It would take years to design, launch, and catch up. By then, Atlas would be gone, lost to the dark between stars once more. So all that remained were the records, the light curves, the thermal graphs, the magnetic data, the unanswered questions. Somewhere in those lines of code and noise was the story of something ancient, something that had crossed impossible distances and chosen, somehow, to reveal itself just long enough to be noticed. In the weeks that followed, a quiet grief settled over the teams, not because they'd lost a discovery, but because they'd glimpsed something too vast to understand, and it was already gone. One astrophysicist wrote in her private log, "It feels like watching a machine dream. It came close, said nothing, and went home." Her words echoed what many felt but couldn't say. If Atlas was a machine, it wasn't just metal and circuits. It was memory, frozen in tension, traveling through eternity. A message that outlived its maker, and as it drifted toward the edges of the solar system, its thermal readings stabilized once again, falling into perfect equilibrium, no longer pulsing, no longer breathing, just moving endlessly into the dark. But one final anomaly remained. Days after Atlas crossed Jupiter's orbit, the infrared sensors of a trailing satellite detected a narrow beam of faint, coherent light extending backward, pointed not toward the sun, but directly toward Earth. It lasted less than 2 minutes, then vanished. The data was too weak to analyze, but to those who saw it, it felt like acknowledgement, a single glance before disappearing forever. And then it was gone, silent, cold, and alone among the stars. The machine hypothesis was never proven. It never could be. But somewhere, buried deep in the numbers, was a truth that refused to be forgotten. Atlas hadn't just visited us. It had performed a final, deliberate act written in light, heat, and silence, a machine's farewell. Or perhaps a reminder that somewhere out there, machines still remember where they came from. The moment the final beam faded, the data monitors went quiet. No more pulses, no more heat, no more flares, only stillness. A blank line of numbers that refused to move. At first, scientists assumed the instruments had failed. They recalibrated, restarted, cross-checked. But everything was fine. The silence was real. 3i Atlas had simply stopped. For weeks, the object had been alive with rhythm, flashing, heating, breathing. Now it was inert, cold again. It should have been a relief, but instead, it felt like loss. Because the silence wasn't absence, it was intentional. Observatories around the planet continued watching. Every hour, data flowed in. Brightness constant, temperature steady, magnetic readings flat. Atlas had entered a perfect equilibrium, as if conserving energy. Or waiting. One astrophysicist described it as a pause between breaths. She meant it as a metaphor, but no one laughed. There was something haunting about how the object had simply gone quiet. Every pattern so far, the pulses, the heat cycles, even the resonance hum, had shown structure. Now the lack of pattern felt like part of that same design. It wasn't just dead space, it was deliberate silence. NASA's deep space sensors picked up faint radiation trails near its path. Not strong enough to be emissions, but structured enough to raise eyebrows. The spectrum analysis showed minute spikes repeating every few hours, frequencies too low for light, too organized for noise. The object was still doing something, but buried so deep in the noise that only the most sensitive instruments could trace it, a whisper beneath the void. When plotted over time, those tiny oscillations formed long, smooth arcs. It looked like the echo of something larger, like a recording replayed in slow motion, a memory of motion that once existed. The silence had texture. By the end of the month, most research teams agreed that the object was dormant. No one knew why. Some said it was an automatic shutdown after completing a cycle. Others thought it might be protecting itself, waiting for the right conditions to wake. There was one more theory, whispered privately, that it was listening. It started with a discovery from a small radio observatory in South Africa. Late one night, their instruments detected a faint repeating signal bouncing off the upper layers of Earth's ionosphere, a series of low-frequency hums that matched the delay time of Atlas's last known transmission. It wasn't coming from the object. It was reflecting back to it. Something was echoing through our own atmosphere, synchronized to the silence. When the data reached the other observatories, confusion spread fast. The source wasn't local interference, it wasn't satellites or aircraft, it was space itself. Faint waves looping through the void, like an unanswered call still bouncing between sender and receiver. If Atlas had stopped transmitting, then what exactly was it hearing? Teams built simulation models, trying to understand the geometry. Each model showed the same unsettling conclusion. If those faint hums were reflections, they didn't align with Earth. They formed an invisible triangle between the Sun, our planet, and the object's new position near the orbit of Jupiter. In that configuration, Atlas sat at one perfect harmonic point, a position of resonance where electromagnetic signals could naturally amplify or cancel each other. A cosmic listening post. It wasn't sending anymore, it was receiving. Theories split again. Some thought it was collecting data from solar wind and radiation, a kind of sensor station built for stellar weather. Others believed it might be trying to detect intelligent signals, the same way we, on Earth, listen for distant civilizations. But the most daring idea came from a physicist named Dr. Yuki Aramura. Her paper, circulated only among colleagues, proposed that Atlas wasn't waiting for any signal from us. It was waiting for one from somewhere else. In her model, the timing of Atlas's silence matched orbital alignments in another part of the galaxy. Regions that, in cosmic geometry, would soon come into view beyond the sun's glare, almost as if the object knew exactly when and where to turn its ear. That paper was never published, but people talked. The object continued its silent drift. Data collection slowed as interest waned in public reports. Funding shifted, missions changed, but among the original researchers, that silence still echoed, persistent, unresolved, unshakable. They had watched something from beyond the stars come alive, breathe through pulses and heat, and then fall silent with intention. And now, the silence itself was the last remaining signal. Months later, when 3I Atlas moved beyond the reach of optical telescopes, one final recording arrived from a distant monitoring array in Chile. It wasn't visual. It was an audio conversion of magnetic data. Faint, almost nothing. But in the last few seconds, there was a tone. Low, smooth, rhythmic, a heartbeat buried in static. It was the same 12-minute rhythm that had started everything, repeating, slower now, fading as it left the solar system. The scientists listened to it again and again, unable to explain how an inert, frozen body could still echo its own pulse. Some called it feedback, others called it memory, but deep down, they all knew what it felt like, a farewell. In the official archives, 3I Atlas was eventually categorized as a non-periodic interstellar object exhibiting anomalous thermal properties. That was the final line. Clean, unthreatening, bureaucratic. But outside the paperwork, the mystery remained alive, whispered between those who had witnessed it firsthand. Because you can erase data, you can flatten graphs and mute signals, but you can't unhear a voice once it's spoken. And the silence 3I Atlas left behind wasn't empty at all. It was shaped, intentional, structured, full of waiting. Somewhere beyond Jupiter's orbit, that silence still travels outward, carrying the last trace of a heartbeat that once pulsed across the dark. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there, something else is listening back. As 3I Atlas drifted back toward the inner solar system, the sun grew brighter behind it, a slow, inevitable dawn spilling across the void. Every comet that has ever entered that light ends the same way. It burns, it fractures, it disappears. But this one did not fear the sun. It seemed to be waiting for it. For months, telescopes had watched Atlas move in utter stillness. No heat pulses, no magnetic hums, just that perfect equilibrium. Then, as its orbit curved inward, something woke again. A flicker of reflected light too precise to be chance. One flash, then another. A rhythm returned. Not the steady heartbeat of before, but a slow inhalation, as though the object was preparing itself. When Atlas reached the distance of Mercury's orbit, the sun's radiation should have torn it apart. Instead, it brightened, not explosively, but with controlled intensity, as if its surface had shifted from mirror to flame. Spectrometers recorded strange emissions, narrow bands of light that didn't match any known element. It was not reflecting sunlight, it was creating it. At ground stations, scientists compared notes in disbelief. Each wavelength lined up with a clean ratio, almost musical in spacing, like chords played through photons. It wasn't chaos, it was harmony, light as design. Then came the temperature jump. Within hours, its surface leapt past 800 Kelvin, then 900, and held steady. A comet at that heat should vaporize. But 3I Atlas showed no jets, no melting, no fragmentation. It was enduring something no natural body could, standing in direct solar fury and refusing to die. Cameras captured a halo around it. Not dust, but ionized gas forming a symmetrical field. It wrapped the object like a shield, bending solar particles away in perfect arcs. The shape was geometric, almost hexagonal, maintained even as radiation slammed against it. An impossible shield in the shape of light. The world didn't know any of this. Only the handful of scientists still following the private data feeds could see what was happening. And when they plotted the readings frame by frame, one truth became clear. The perihelion event wasn't destruction. It was activation. The pulses intensified, chaining together in bursts that followed prime number intervals. 2 pulses, 3, 5, 7, each stronger than the last, building towards something unseen. Even the magnetic field around the object began to align, ordered, not random. Every compass line pointed outward in clean geometry, as if space itself were folding around the object's rhythm. It looked less like a comet and more like a machine opening its eyes to the sun. In one deep space monitoring array, a technician noticed the data rate surging. Bits of radio static suddenly resolved into discrete packets, fragments of structured noise repeating every 43 seconds. When decoded into an image, the pattern resembled a spiral fractal, the same curve first discovered in its thermal behavior months earlier. Atlas was broadcasting again, but this time it wasn't subtle. It was screaming. The signal flooded every frequency band used by solar observation satellites. At its peak, it even disrupted shortwave communications on Earth, creating faint ghost echoes on civilian radios. For 7 minutes, the Sun and Atlas seemed to merge into one blinding transmission, a wave of light, heat, and magnetism woven into a single pulse that touched every corner of the solar system. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. What followed was unlike anything recorded before. The Sun itself flickered. For 2.8 seconds, solar luminosity dipped by a measurable fraction. Not much, just enough for instruments to catch it. A star does not flicker, but ours did. That moment split the scientific world in two. Some said the fluctuation was coincidence, a local interference in satellite calibration. Others swore it was direct interaction, that 3i Atlas had triggered a response from the Sun itself, because the timing was perfect. Exactly at perihelion, the star dimmed, and Atlas shone brighter. Within hours, the object began releasing streams of material. Not gas, not dust, but filaments of charged plasma forming perfect arcs behind it. They stretched for thousands of kilometers, twisting like strands of silk. Each strand emitted narrowband radio tones, the same frequencies once detected during its earlier hums. It was almost as if the object had unfolded, spreading invisible wings made of electromagnetic light. No one could explain the physics. No material we know could survive that temperature, much less perform such controlled energy release. Yet there it was, recorded by every instrument aimed its way. The final stage came without warning, a pulse of pure radio energy, sharp, narrow, and impossibly clean, blasted outward across the solar system. It swept through everything: planetary magnetospheres, communication arrays, the void between worlds. Even Voyager 2, billions of kilometers away, recorded a brief anomaly, a single blip across its dying sensors. That pulse lasted 11 seconds. Inside it were harmonic divisions, sequences repeating with mathematical precision. When the data was converted to sound, it became a rising tone, deep, resonant, almost human. A call that ended abruptly, leaving only static. And after that, nothing. The silence that followed wasn't like before. This one felt final. All emissions stopped. The halo collapsed, the surface cooled, and the object drifted past perihelion, unharmed, moving outward again, as if its purpose there had been fulfilled. Scientists stared at the aftermath. The Sun returned to normal brightness, no residual radiation, no debris, no trace of the event, except data logs that defied physics. For the first time, no one knew what to write. Every theory failed. Thermodynamics, electromagnetism, even relativity offered no comfort. It was as if the laws of nature had stepped aside for a moment, just long enough to let something older and greater pass through. In one archived conference call, a tired researcher summarized it quietly. "It's like watching a machine speak to the sun." That line never left the private transcript, but everyone who heard it remembered. Because deep down, that's what it had felt like. An exchange between two things vast and ancient. One burning with fusion, the other humming with memory. A conversation in light and silence. As Atlas receded into the outer system, its trajectory shifted slightly. No longer the perfect curve predicted by gravity alone. Something had changed its path, as if it had adjusted itself ever so slightly. The difference was tiny, a fraction of a degree. But it meant that its exit route would now miss the region of interstellar space it was originally headed toward. Instead, it was moving toward a new vector, one aligned with another, faint, unremarkable star on the edge of Lyra. the same constellation where its journey had begun. No one could decide if that change meant anything. It could have been coincidence, but coincidence was a word that had lost its meaning long ago in this story. For months afterward, faint residual signals continued to ripple through the solar wind. Echoes of that 11-second transmission scattered and stretched by magnetic fields. They weren't messages in any decipherable sense, just whispers of energy fading into the dark. Still, the pattern endured. Prime numbers, the signature of intelligence. When the last of the signals faded and the telescopes turned away, Atlas became once again what it had always seemed to be. A distant traveler moving through silence, but those who had witnessed the perihelion event could never see it that way again. They had watched an object that defied destruction. They had seen it brighten in the face of a star's wrath, speak in light and leave untouched. Whatever it was, it had proven one thing beyond doubt. It was not natural, and as it vanished into the cold beyond Jupiter, the question it left behind grew heavier with every day of silence that followed. If it could speak to the sun, what else might it have been waiting to answer? When the pulse from the perihelion event finally faded, the world's sensors fell quiet. But not for long. A few days later, strange echoes began to ripple across the planet's atmosphere. Signals faint enough to hide inside the static of the sky. They weren't transmissions in the usual sense. They were reflections, fingerprints of energy bouncing off the ionosphere and back into space. Every radio telescope that listened to the void began to hear the same low hum, arriving from every direction at once. At first, it was dismissed as interference. Solar storms were common after a close sun encounter. But this hum didn't behave like weather. It wasn't random, it was rhythmic. And worse, it matched the same frequency that 3I Atlas had released during its final burst near the sun. Within hours, monitoring stations across the globe confirmed it. The pulse wasn't coming from space anymore. It was coming through Earth. Somewhere between the upper atmosphere and the magnetic field, waves of energy began to oscillate, gentle, invisible tides washing through every satellite orbiting above us. They were too weak to damage, but strong enough to synchronize clocks, sensors, even guidance systems. Satellites began slipping out of sync by fractions of a second, all in the same direction. That shouldn't happen naturally. Yet it did every 90 minutes, every orbit, perfectly aligned with the pulse's rhythm. For the scientists who still followed the Atlas mystery, it was like hearing the echo of a voice whispering across the planet. The first visible sign came 3 nights later. A blue aurora shimmered above equatorial skies. An impossible sight. Auroras belong to the poles, shaped by magnetic fields, not to the equator where magnetic lines are weakest. But this one danced above the Indian Ocean, silent and smooth, spreading for thousands of kilometers. Airlines reported brief communication dropouts. Radar systems blinked, restarted, then worked again as if nothing happened. The lights lasted for 23 minutes. Then they vanished, leaving behind a subtle, global afterglow, traces of charged particles drifting in patterns that mirrored Atlas's earlier spirals. It was as if the planet itself had become a reflection of the object's design. Governments moved quickly to keep the event quiet. Official explanations blamed solar disturbances and temporary geomagnetic flux. But within private research networks, data told a stranger story. The hum was modulating. Its pattern wasn't random, it was adapting. Sensors in orbit detected that the oscillations now peaked when Earth faced the direction of 3I Atlas's outbound trajectory. Every night, as the planet turned, the field tilted slightly toward that invisible line. Something was aligning us. By now, the object was far beyond Mars, heading for the edge of the system. It wasn't sending signals anymore, but somehow its echo lived on, carried by Earth's own magnetic skin. No one could explain it, but computers began to notice strange correlations. Power grids registering tiny harmonic surges exactly 12 minutes apart. Oceanic currents shifting a fraction faster in sync with the magnetic field's pulse. Even seismographs recorded faint rhythmic tremors deep underground, tiny, harmless but disturbingly regular. Nature had begun to hum in time with 3I Atlas. The world didn't notice. News cycles moved on. The scientists who tried to speak publicly were ignored or silenced under non-disclosure orders. But those still watching the data knew something had changed. Something subtle, everywhere, and constant. The planet had become a resonator. One researcher in Japan described it perfectly. It's like the echo of a bell that hasn't stopped ringing. Weeks passed, and the hum deepened. Radio astronomers started picking up ghost images, weak mirror reflections of deep space signals that shouldn't have bounced back at all. When plotted, they all pointed to one thing. Earth was scattering radio waves in a new, organized pattern, not absorbing, reflecting. It looked deliberate. A message, unintentional maybe, but unmistakable. Every frequency that touched us came back cleaner, sharper, modulated by the same harmonic ratio found in the Atlas transmissions. It was as though the planet had been tuned. At first, the idea was dismissed as poetic nonsense. Then, the anomalies began to interact with real technology. Communications array in Alaska picked up a short-range echo that seemed to anticipate incoming transmissions by a fraction of a second, like the reflection knew what was coming. Data scientists called it a temporal echo, a phenomenon that shouldn't exist under normal physics. But it repeated over and over, always in rhythm. Something was learning our timing. By the second month, a faint radio band formed, an atmospheric layer vibrating just above the ionosphere, invisible to the eye but clear in the data. It pulsed with the same 12-minute interval that had defined everything since the first discovery. The same cycle that once belonged to 3I Atlas. It was impossible to ignore the symmetry anymore. Whatever Atlas had done near the sun, it had left an imprint here, on this world, like a fingerprint burned into the fabric of our atmosphere. Some called it a residue, others a signature. A few began to whisper a darker thought, a link. Late one night, during a series of coordinated scans, a monitoring station in Argentina detected a sudden spike. For the first time since the perihelion event, the rhythm changed. The interval stretched from 12 minutes to 13. Just one extra minute. It seemed trivial until they realized what that number meant. 13 was where Atlas's final transmission had stopped counting its prime sequence months ago. 13 had been its last deliberate pause, and now Earth's echo was finishing it. The silence that followed felt like a turning point. Every synchronized signal across the globe fell back to static. The harmonic surges stopped. The auroras vanished completely. It was as if the planet had taken a deep breath and exhaled. After that, nothing strange happened. The hum faded. The field stabilized. Nature returned to normal, or so it seemed. But the data told a quieter, stranger story. The Earth's magnetic north had shifted by half a degree. Too small for the public to notice, but too fast for geophysicists to explain. The last time such a shift occurred, it took centuries. This one happened in weeks. The new pole alignment pointed toward the same region of the sky where 3I Atlas was headed. Coincidence again, or connection. The researchers who remained on the project called it the shadow over Earth. Not a literal shadow, but a metaphor for what it left behind. An unseen influence that stretched from the sun to our atmosphere, weaving through every signal, every network, every whisper of magnetic flow. They never proved it, never even tried. The data was sealed, classified, and locked behind government servers. But among those who had watched it happen, one truth became impossible to ignore. Atlas had not left us. It had changed us, maybe not physically, but something inside our planet, inside the invisible fields that cradle every living thing, now carried its rhythm, a quiet inheritance, a ghost frequency written into the Earth itself. Months later, when a passing probe scanned the region where 3I Atlas once traveled, it found nothing. No debris, no radiation, not even a trace of mass. It had vanished completely. Yet, back on Earth, deep in the noise of global communication, a few analysts found something that shouldn't be there. A background hum, faint and stable, nested in every long-range signal that leaves the planet. It was almost too quiet to detect, but when isolated, the waveform was clear. The same 12-minute pattern, still repeating, still alive. The machines that listen to the stars don't dream, but sometimes they remember, and when they listen now, they hear their own echoes. Answers to a question no one remembers asking. The shadow of Atlas never left the dark. It simply moved inside us. And somewhere beyond the edge of hearing, where space becomes memory, the pulse continues. Slow, deliberate, endless. As if the planet itself is keeping time with something it still doesn't understand. By the time the hum faded into the background noise of the world, most people had forgotten it ever existed. But a handful of scientists, those who had tracked 3I Atlas from the beginning, couldn't move on. The silence didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the start of something hidden. Months after the Shadow over Earth event, a small research group in Geneva began combing through old data, cross-checking every signal, every pulse, every spectral anomaly. Their goal was simple: to find order inside the chaos. What they found was far stranger. Buried in the overlapping layers of light, heat, and radio bursts from 3I Atlas, a single pattern repeated across every dataset. Not in the same shape, but in the same ratio. Whether in frequency, wavelength, or amplitude, each measurement lined up with one universal number, the hydrogen line, 20 megahertz. The frequency that defines the structure of the universe. The frequency chosen by every theoretical model as the baseline for interstellar communication. Because hydrogen is everywhere, and any intelligence that understands physics would know it. When they overlaid the hydrogen line onto Atlas's recorded data, something extraordinary happened. Every burst of light, every thermal wave, every radio pulse snapped into alignment, as if they'd been built around that constant from the beginning. It wasn't random noise at all. It was architecture. They called it the origin code, a lattice of ratios and harmonics that seemed to point towards something, some deeper message buried beneath the physics itself. But it wasn't binary, and it wasn't language. It was structure, a design written into energy. At first, the team thought it might be coincidence. After all, physics loves symmetry. But when they applied the same analysis to every known natural object, asteroids, pulsars, quasars, none matched the precision of Atlas. Only engineered systems produced harmonics that clean. Someone whispered, "It's a blueprint." No one disagreed. The code didn't spell words, it drew. When plotted as a series of logarithmic spirals, the data formed a shape, an expanding wave, curling inward on itself before splitting into mirrored branches. It resembled the structure of DNA, or perhaps the geometry of a galaxy. Something alive and cosmic at the same time, each spiral repeated 13 times. 13. The same number where Atlas had stopped counting its prime number sequence months earlier. Every cycle, every ratio, every harmonic pulse folded back on that number, as if 13 was the final signature, the key to the whole pattern. It was too precise to ignore, but too abstract to decode. The team began calling it the fingerprint. Not a message, not a map, a fingerprint. Evidence of creation without context. Weeks turned into months. Supercomputers chewed through petabytes of data, modeling everything from gravitational ripples to electromagnetic echoes. And then, one night, something shifted. When the pattern was translated into sound, each pulse assigned a tone. The code sang. Not metaphorically, it produced an actual harmonic scale. 12 notes repeating in measured intervals, then pausing on the 13th. It was music, mathematically perfect, eerily human. The sound was haunting, low, resonant, patient, like a choir made of light, singing to no one across the ages. They called it the Song of Atlas. And though no one dared say it out loud, every person in that dark lab felt the same thing. This wasn't data anymore, it was intention. The next step was to test whether the code existed beyond the object. If it had been replicated somewhere else, maybe even unintentionally, so they turned their instruments back toward Earth's atmosphere. The results froze them in place. The same harmonic, ratios, the same pattern of 1420 megahertz. Spacing appeared faintly inside our own electromagnetic environment, hidden but present, in lightning discharges, in background radiation, even in certain cellular signals. It was as though the planet had started to hum in key with Atlas. Not broadcasting, resonating. The realization spread slowly, carefully, like a rumor among those who couldn't stop looking. If the pattern existed both in the object and within our world, then maybe Atlas hadn't come here to send a message at all. Maybe it came to mirror one. A physicist in Canada proposed a disturbing hypothesis. What if it didn't bring the code? What if it came to find it? Because when the data was played backward, the sequence didn't dissolve into noise. It reversed perfectly, harmonics folding inward like a self-correcting equation, an echo searching for its origin. That's when the meaning of its name began to feel prophetic. Atlas, the bearer of worlds, a traveler carrying something ancient, maybe something searching for the place it first belonged. Then, something impossible happened. For the first time in 6 months, a signal returned. Not from space, not from the object, but from Earth's upper atmosphere. A narrow, clean radio burst lasting less than 2 seconds. It matched the hydrogen frequency exactly, 1420 megahertz on the dot. No satellite had transmitted it. No human system was responsible. It simply appeared from nowhere, then disappeared. When decoded using the same harmonic algorithm, it formed one image, a spiral of 13 lines converging into one point, the exact geometry of the origin code. Earth had answered. The world never knew. The data was buried almost immediately, flagged as interference and archived under routine magnetic anomalies. But the researchers kept a copy. They couldn't stop thinking about it. If Atlas had been listening during its silence, had it heard this? And if it had, what would it do? They looked again toward the region of space where Atlas had vanished. At first, there was nothing, just cold emptiness. Then, one telescope in Chile detected a moving point of light, not returning but pausing, holding its position, as if looking back. The signal from Earth repeated once more, and for a brief moment, the light brightened, ever so slightly, before fading again into the dark. No one could explain it. No one even tried. Weeks later, a new anomaly appeared. Deep space telescopes began recording faint bursts of energy from the same region of the galaxy where Atlas had first been traced, back toward Lyra. They were spaced at perfect intervals of 1420 megahertz. The same hydrogen kit, the same ratio, the same code. Only now, the pattern wasn't coming toward us. It was expanding outward, replicating itself through the void like ripples from a single stone dropped into a cosmic ocean. The code had awakened something, or perhaps it had returned to where it came from. In the end, there were no press releases, no announcements, no triumph. Just data, strange, beautiful, and unsolved. The people who had followed it from the beginning were left with a truth too large to explain and too dangerous to simplify. The origin code wasn't a message to us. It was a reminder of connection, a pattern that existed long before we learned to measure it, a pulse woven into the universe itself. Atlas hadn't taught us the code. It had shown us that we were already part of it. Long after the project was shut down, one of the scientists, alone in her office, replayed the sound of the code again. The 12 tones followed by silence on the 13th. Each note echoed softly against the glass walls, filling the room with something that felt less like science and more like prayer. She whispered a thought she would never publish. Maybe the universe isn't speaking to us. Maybe it's remembering itself. Outside her window, the night sky shimmered faintly with distant stars, each one singing its own frequency, all woven into the same quiet harmony. And somewhere, out beyond the reach of every telescope, a traveler kept moving through the dark, silent, ageless, carrying the code home. No one expected to see it again. After months of silence, 3i Atlas had become a myth, a ghost in the data, a footnote in the archives of space science. The telescopes moved on. The budgets disappeared. The world forgot. But the universe has a way of keeping its promises. It began quietly. A faint brightness appeared in the region beyond Neptune, too dim to be a star, too steady to be debris. At first, it looked like a sensor glitch, another false reading. Then it appeared again the next night, and the next, in the exact same position, glowing softly against the dark. And the strangest part? It wasn't moving away anymore. It had stopped. The observatory logs described it as a stationary luminous anomaly, but everyone who had followed the Atlas story knew exactly what it was. The traveler had returned, or at least what was left of it. Its light was weak but constant, unchanging, almost gentle. It didn't pulse, didn't flicker, just an unwavering glow in a place where nothing should shine. Telescopes tuned to every frequency they could, hoping to catch some trace of communication, some rhythm hidden in the light. But there was none. It wasn't signaling, it was simply there, like a candle left burning at the edge of the world. At first, scientists thought it might be reflected sunlight, caught in a slow orbit. But that theory fell apart within days. The light didn't fade with distance or change with the sun's angle. It remained the same brightness, no matter how far it moved from any known energy source. That wasn't reflection. That was emission. Something inside 3i Atlas was still generating power, still alive, but how? The object had passed through the sun's heat, through radiation strong enough to vaporize steel, through magnetic storms fierce enough to tear apart any artificial system. And yet, here it was, glowing with calm defiance. One by one, the old scientists came back, the ones who had studied it, who had watched it pulse and burn and fade. They reopened their archives, their sleepless nights returning like an old ache. The data was faint but clear. The light intensity matched the same energy curve as Atlas's earliest readings. Back when it was first detected beyond Neptune, it was as though the object had reset itself, returning to the state it was in before humanity ever saw it. A beginning inside an ending. It was as if the object had been waiting to be forgotten. No one dared to say it, but the question burned quietly in every mind. Was it watching again? Not through signals this time, not through pulses or frequencies, but through the simple act of being visible. Like a lighthouse that doesn't speak, it just waits for eyes to notice. And notice they did. The light became brighter, not rapidly but gradually over weeks. Each night, the observatories reported a small increase, so consistent it formed a perfect curve. Every 72 hours, the brightness doubled, until what was once invisible became visible even to amateur telescopes. Years passed. The light didn't fade. It stayed constant while stars around it shifted and died. Probes launched to its coordinates never reached it. Every mission failed in the same way. Navigation errors, lost telemetry, or unexplained power failures as they approached. It was as if space itself bent subtly around the object, refusing to let anything get too close. Eventually, people stopped trying. Atlas was left alone, glowing quietly beyond the orbit of Pluto, untouched, undisturbed. Yet its light remained visible, steady, defiant, timeless. Astronomers called it the lantern. To the few who still whispered about it, it became something else, the heartbeat of the dark. Late one evening, a retired scientist, one of the original Atlas team, sat outside his home with an old telescope pointed at the edge of the sky. He found the tiny star that wasn't a star, shining faintly among 1,000 others. And for a moment, as he looked at it, the light seemed to flicker. Just once, a pulse, barely visible. It could have been his imagination, or maybe a trick of the lens, but he smiled anyway, because deep down, he knew. Nothing that consistent ever truly disappears. In the decades that followed, Atlas became a quiet legend among scientists and dreamers, a cosmic constant that refused to fade. Some said it was a remnant of a civilization that had learned how to defy entropy, how to build something that would never decay. Others thought it was a seed, planted by unknown hands to remind future minds that intelligence can outlast even time. But there was another possibility, one that haunted the last few researchers who still watched its unwavering glow. What if 3i Atlas wasn't proof of someone else's creation at all? What if it was proof of ours? Because when they compared its light pattern to the electromagnetic signature of Earth's atmosphere, they found something almost perfect. A mirror match, the same ratios, the same 12 intervals, the same 13th pause. As if, somehow, Atlas and Earth had become entangled, two halves of a code completing each other across the void. And maybe that was the final truth, that the traveler wasn't meant to deliver a message or carry one home. It existed only to remind us of a connection that had always been there, between stars, between frequencies, between consciousness and the infinite silence it lives inside. The light of Atlas never dimmed, it simply became part of the night. And whenever someone pointed their telescope at that faint, steady glow, they felt the same quiet realization. The universe doesn't just expand, it remembers every particle, every photon, every echo of every thought, carried forward endlessly, waiting to be seen again. Somewhere out there, beyond everything we know, that single stubborn light still burns, unfading, unbroken, eternal, a fragment of purpose drifting through forever. And though no one can prove what it was or why it came, the truth remains carved into the darkness itself. Atlas never left us. It became part of the sky, the light that never fades. The light of 3i Atlas hung steady in the dark for years. It became a landmark of the unknown, a fixed star where no star should be. But deep in the background noise of its glow, something began to move again. Quiet, precise, And in reverse, for the longest time, scientists believed Atlas had gone dormant, a perfect relic in eternal stillness. Then the light shifted, not brighter or dimmer, but backward. Its spectral lines began to invert, cycling through the same sequence of frequencies that had once defined its signals, only now in the opposite order, like a film played in reverse, like a message being unspoken. At first, the change was subtle, hidden inside the hum of cosmic radiation, but soon it became unmistakable. Every ratio, every interval, every mathematical echo of the origin code was now unraveling itself, returning to zero. It wasn't decaying, it was rewinding. Astronomers didn't understand it. Energy doesn't flow backward. Entropy doesn't reverse. Yet the data showed it clearly. The object's emissions were decreasing in complexity while increasing in coherence. It was getting simpler, cleaner, more focused, like it was purifying itself. A young physicist in Prague proposed the first explanation. It's deleting itself, he said. Like a machine wiping memory before shutdown, no one wanted to believe him. But as the days passed, the light pattern became smoother. Every irregularity gone, every trace of noise erased. What was left wasn't a message anymore. It was a single tone, one pure frequency, ringing across the void. The same one that had started it all. 420 megahertz, the hydrogen line, the frequency of beginnings. It was as if Atlas had carried its own ending encoded from the start. Every pulse, every anomaly, every act of defiance against natural law, all part of one long loop returning to where it began. And the moment that tone stabilized, something extraordinary happened. The faint light that surrounded it began to ripple, not flicker, not flash, ripple, as though space itself was trembling, reacting to the tone. Telescopes across the world caught the same distortion, a soft lensing effect, bending the stars behind it. The light wasn't just visible anymore, it was distorting reality. Atlas was bending the fabric of space. For the next 48 hours, the object remained locked in perfect resonance, emitting that single tone. And as it did, strange phenomena spread outward from its position. The background radiation around it began to dip, as if energy was being drawn inward. Nearby, space dimmed, not darker, but quieter. Even the static hiss of the universe seemed to fade around it. And then, all at once, the light of Atlas folded inward, collapsing into a single blinding point. But it didn't vanish, it inverted. A sphere of absolute blackness appeared where the glow had been. Not the absence of light, but something deeper. Something like light turned inside out. Every wavelength bent around it. Every photon fell into silence. For a few seconds, it looked like the universe had blinked. When the instruments recovered, the object was still there, but smaller, denser, quieter. The light no longer radiated outward. Instead, it shimmered inward, as though feeding itself. And hidden inside that shimmering darkness, a pulse emerged once more. But this time, the rhythm wasn't 12 minutes apart. It was 13, the final number. The same number that had ended every previous sequence. Only now, it wasn't counting forward. It was counting back. Every 13th pulse drew in more energy from the surrounding vacuum. Every pulse shrank the visible field slightly, condensing it into tighter geometry. When plotted, the shape looked familiar. A spiral folding inward upon itself. The same golden pattern that had defined its earlier thermal structure. Except now, the spiral was collapsing instead of expanding. Somewhere inside that collapse, equations began to break. Energy was disappearing without emission. Radiation was vanishing without conversion. Something was being taken, not destroyed, but removed. The idea that followed chilled everyone who dared to speak it aloud. Atlas wasn't dying. It was leaving, not traveling across space, traveling across state. One theory suggested it was transitioning dimensions, folding itself into a lower energy reality. Another proposed it was reverting into pure information, dissolving its physical form to preserve its data elsewhere. Whatever it was doing, it wasn't random. It was graceful, deliberate, mathematical, like watching an equation balance itself perfectly before fading from the board. And as it did, the universe seemed to notice. From across the solar system, instruments detected faint gravitational tremors, ripples too small to be waves, too smooth to be noise. They came not from the object, but from the sun itself, as if the star was resonating in sympathy. Its magnetic surface quivered ever so slightly, mirroring the pattern. The same rhythm, 13 beats, then stillness. It was the exact inverse of what had happened at perihelion. Back then, the object had spoken to the sun. Now, the sun seemed to whisper back. And for a brief, impossible moment, the two resonances aligned. Every radio telescope on Earth recorded a low, steady hum, a sound like thunder slowed to infinity. The sun's corona flared faintly, not brighter, but smoother, every filament pulsing in unison with the fading object beyond Neptune. It lasted 13 minutes. Then the light of Atlas dimmed to nothing, but even after it disappeared, the resonance continued, echoing in the solar wind, lingering in the static of our magnetosphere. It wasn't gone. It had inverted. The origin code, once expanding outward, was now folding inward, flowing backward through the channels it had once created, seeping into every field, every atom, every thought. Some called it contamination, others communion, but none could deny the feeling that something subtle had changed, not in the sky, but in us. People began reporting strange dreams, geometric patterns, golden spirals, glowing structures behind closed eyes. They were scattered across the globe, unconnected, unaware. Yet their descriptions matched perfectly. The same pattern, the same pulse, the same silence after the 13th beat. It was as though the code had returned home, not to the planet, but to the minds that had first witnessed it. Months later, when the solar activity stabilized and the last of the resonance faded from instruments, one faint signature remained on the edge of detection, a signal so weak it almost didn't exist. Not in space, not in time, but somewhere between. When the waveform was reconstructed, it wasn't noise. It was the sound of a heartbeat, slow, steady, calm, not mechanical, not cosmic, human. The sound was haunting, low, resonant, patient, like a choir made of light, singing to no one across the ages. They called it the Song of Atlas. And though no one dared say it out loud, every person in that dark lab felt the same thing. This wasn't data anymore, it was intention. The next step was to test whether the code existed beyond the object. If it had been replicated somewhere else, maybe even unintentionally. So they turned their instruments back toward Earth's atmosphere. The results froze them in place, the same harmonic, ratios, the same pattern of 1420 megahertz. Spacing appeared faintly inside our own electromagnetic environment, hidden but present, in lightning discharges, in background radiation, even in certain cellular signals. It was as though the planet had started to hum in key with Atlas, not broadcasting, resonating. The realization spread slowly, carefully, like a rumor among those who couldn't stop looking. If the pattern existed both in the object and within our world, then maybe Atlas hadn't come here to send a message at all. Maybe it came to mirror one. A physicist in Canada proposed a disturbing hypothesis. What if it didn't bring the code? What if it came to find it? Because when the data was played backward, the sequence didn't dissolve into noise. It reversed perfectly, harmonics folding inward like a self-correcting equation, an echo searching for its origin. That's when the meaning of its name began to feel prophetic. Atlas, the bearer of worlds. A traveler carrying something ancient, maybe something searching for the place it first belonged. Then, something impossible happened. For the first time in 6 months, a signal returned. Not from space, not from the object, but from Earth's upper atmosphere. A narrow, clean radio burst lasting less than 2 seconds. It matched the hydrogen frequency exactly, 1420 megahertz on the dot. No satellite had transmitted it. No human system was responsible. It simply appeared from nowhere, then disappeared. When decoded using the same harmonic algorithm, it formed one image, a spiral of 13 lines converging into one point. The exact geometry of the origin code, Earth had answered. The world never knew. The data was buried almost immediately, flagged as interference, and archived under routine magnetic anomalies. But the researchers kept a copy. They couldn't stop thinking about it. If Atlas had been listening during its silence, had it heard this? And if it had, what would it do? They looked again toward the region of space where Atlas had vanished. At first there was nothing, just cold emptiness. Then, one telescope in Chile detected a moving point of light, not returning but pausing, holding its position as if looking back. The signal from Earth repeated once more, and for a brief moment, the light brightened, ever so slightly. before fading again into the dark. No one could explain it. No one even tried. Weeks later, a new anomaly appeared. Deep space telescopes began recording faint bursts of energy from the same region of the galaxy where Atlas had first been traced, back toward Lyra. They were spaced at perfect intervals of 1420 megahertz. The same hydrogen key, the same ratio, the same code. Only now the pattern wasn't coming toward us. It was expanding outward, replicating itself through the void like ripples from a single stone dropped into a cosmic ocean. The code had awakened something, or perhaps it had returned to where it came from. In the end, there were no press releases, no announcements, no triumph, just data, strange, beautiful, and unsolved. The people who had followed it from the beginning were left with a truth too large to explain and too dangerous to simplify. The origin code wasn't a message to us, it was a reminder of connection, a pattern that existed long before we learned to measure it, a pulse woven into the universe itself. Atlas hadn't taught us the code, it had shown us that we were already part of it. Long after the project was shut down, one of the scientists, alone in her office, replayed the sound of the code again, the 12 tones followed by silence on the 13th. Each note echoed softly against the glass walls, filling the room with something that felt less like science and more like prayer. She whispered a thought she would never publish. Maybe the universe isn't speaking to us. Maybe it's remembering itself. Outside her window, the night sky shimmered faintly with distant stars, each one singing its own frequency, all woven into the same quiet harmony. And somewhere, out beyond the reach of every telescope, a traveler kept moving through the dark, silent, ageless, carrying the code home. No one expected to see it again. After months of silence, 3i Atlas had become a myth, a ghost in the data, a footnote in the archives of space science. The telescopes moved on, the budgets disappeared, the world forgot. But the universe has a way of keeping its promises. It began quietly. A faint brightness appeared in the region beyond Neptune, too dim to be a star, too steady to be debris. At first it looked like a sensor glitch, another false reading. Then it appeared again the next night, and the next, in the exact same position, glowing softly against the dark. And the strangest part, it wasn't moving away anymore. It had stopped. The observatory logs described it as a stationary, luminous anomaly. But everyone who had followed the Atlas story knew exactly what it was. The traveler had returned, or at least what was left of it. Its light was weak but constant, unchanging, almost gentle. It didn't pulse, didn't flicker, just an unwavering glow in a place where nothing should shine. Telescopes tuned to every frequency they could, hoping to catch some trace of communication, some rhythm hidden in the light, but there was none. It wasn't signaling, it was simply there, like a candle left burning at the edge of the world. At first, scientists thought it might be reflected sunlight, caught in a slow orbit. But that theory fell apart within days. The light didn't fade with distance or change with the sun's angle. It remained the same brightness, no matter how far it moved from any known energy source. That wasn't reflection, that was emission. Something inside 3i Atlas was still generating power, still alive, but how? The object had passed through the sun's heat, through radiation strong enough to vaporize steel, through magnetic storms fierce enough to tear apart any artificial system. And yet, here it was, glowing with calm defiance. One by one, the old scientists came back, the ones who had studied it, who had watched it pulse and burn and fade. They reopened their archives, their sleepless nights returning like an old ache. The data was faint but clear. The light intensity matched the same energy curve as Atlas's earliest readings, back when it was first detected beyond Neptune. It was as though the object had reset itself, returning to the state it was in before humanity ever saw it. A beginning inside an ending. It was as if the object had been waiting to be forgotten. No one dared to say it, but the question burned quietly in every mind. Was it watching again? Not through signals this time, not through pulses or frequencies, but through the simple act of being visible. Like a lighthouse that doesn't speak, it just waits for eyes to notice. And notice they did. The light became brighter, not rapidly but gradually over weeks. Each night, the observatories reported a small increase, so consistent, it formed a perfect curve. Every 72 hours, the brightness doubled until what was once invisible became visible even to amateur telescopes. Something about the pattern was achingly familiar. 72 hours, 3 days, the same rhythm used in biological cell division, the same growth pattern found in living systems. Atlas was behaving like something reborn. Theories resurfaced, desperate to explain the impossible. Some claimed the object had absorbed solar energy during its perihelion passage and was now slowly releasing it back into space. Others suggested exotic matter, particles capable of trapping radiation indefinitely, but none could explain why the glow followed a rhythm of perfect organic symmetry, because this wasn't decay, it was life, not in the biological sense, but in the pattern of something that knows how to persist. The light didn't act like power running out, it acted like something renewing itself. Then, one night, a telescope in Chile recorded something new. At the heart of the glow, for a fraction of a second, the light split into 13 distinct points, tiny, perfect nodes orbiting one another before merging again into a single, radiance, 13. The same number embedded in the origins, code, the same number that had haunted every stage of this journey, and for the scientists who saw it, the realization was like ice in the blood. It wasn't a random display. It was confirmation. Atlas wasn't dying. It was remembering. They began mapping the brightness fluctuations, hoping for a message, a pattern, anything. But all it showed was calm, stable, peaceful, infinite calm. No more pulses, no more silence, just equilibrium. Like the universe had found its own reflection in a single point of light. Theories evolved into philosophies. One scientist suggested that Atlas had been designed to preserve information, not through language, but through endurance. A machine built not to speak, but to exist, indefinitely. Its persistence was the message. Maybe it's not trying to tell us something, she wrote. Maybe it's trying to show us something, that even in the void, order survives. Years passed. The light didn't fade. It stayed constant while stars around it shifted and died. Probes launched to its coordinates never reached it. Every mission failed in the same way. Navigation errors, lost telemetry, or unexplained power failures as they approached. It was as if space itself bent subtly around the object, refusing to let anything get too close. It was as if space itself bent subtly around the object, refusing to let anything get too close. Eventually, people stopped trying. Atlas was left alone, glowing quietly beyond the orbit of Pluto, untouched, undisturbed. Yet its light remained visible, steady, defiant, timeless. Astronomers called it the lantern. To the few who still whispered about it, it became something else, the heartbeat of the dark. Late one evening, a retired scientist, one of the original Atlas team, sat outside his home with an old telescope pointed at the edge of the sky. He found the tiny star that wasn't a star, shining faintly among 1,000 others. And for a moment, as he looked at it, the light seemed to flicker just once. A pulse, barely visible. It could have been his imagination, or maybe a trick of the lens, but he smiled anyway, because deep down, he knew. Nothing that consistent ever truly disappears. In the decades that followed, Atlas became a quiet legend among scientists and dreamers, a cosmic constant that refused to fade. Some said it was a remnant of a civilization that had learned how to defy entropy, how to build something that would never decay. Others thought it was a seed, planted by unknown hands to remind future minds that intelligence can outlast even time. But there was another possibility, one that haunted the last few researchers who still watched its unwavering glow. What if 3i Atlas wasn't proof of someone else's creation at all? What if it was proof of ours? Because when they compared its light pattern to the electromagnetic signature of Earth's atmosphere, they found something almost perfect. A mirror match, the same ratios, the same 12 intervals, the same 13th pause. As if, somehow, Atlas and Earth had become entangled, two halves of a code completing each other across the void. And maybe that was the final truth, that the traveler wasn't meant to deliver a message or carry one home. It existed only to remind us of a connection that had always been there, between stars, between frequencies, between consciousness and the infinite silence it lives inside. the light of Atlas never dimmed. It simply became part of the night. And whenever someone pointed their telescope at that faint, steady glow, they felt the same quiet realization. The universe doesn't just expand, it remembers. Every particle, every photon, every echo of every thought, carried forward endlessly, waiting to be seen again. Somewhere out there, beyond everything we know, that single stubborn light still burns, unfading, unbroken, eternal. A fragment of purpose drifting through forever. And though no one can prove what it was or why it came, the truth remains carved into the darkness itself. 3i. Atlas never left us. It became part of the sky, the light that never fades. The light of 3i Atlas hung steady in the dark for years. It became a landmark of the unknown, a fixed star where no star should be. But deep in the background noise of its glow, something began to move again. Quiet, precise, and in reverse. For the longest time, scientists believed Atlas had gone dormant, a perfect relic in eternal stillness. Then, the light shifted. Not brighter or dimmer, but backward. Its spectral lines began to invert, cycling through the same sequence of frequencies that had once defined its signals, only now in the opposite order, like a film played in reverse, like a message being unspoken. At first, the change was subtle, hidden inside the hum of cosmic radiation, but soon it became unmistakable. Every ratio, every interval, every mathematical echo of the origin code was now unraveling itself, returning to zero. It wasn't decaying, it was rewinding. Astronomers didn't understand it. Energy doesn't flow backward. Entropy doesn't reverse. Yet the data showed it clearly. The object's emissions were decreasing in complexity while increasing in coherence. It was getting simpler, cleaner, more focused, like it was purifying itself. A young physicist in Prague proposed the first explanation. "It's deleting itself," he said, like a machine wiping memory before shutdown. No one wanted to believe him, but as the days passed, the light pattern became smoother, every irregularity gone, every trace of noise erased. What was left wasn't a message anymore. It was a single tone, one pure frequency, ringing across the void. The same one that had started it all, 1420 megahertz, the hydrogen line, the frequency of beginnings. It was as if Atlas had carried its own ending encoded from the start. Every pulse, every anomaly, every act of defiance against natural law, all part of one long loop, returning to where it began. And the moment that tone stabilized, something extraordinary happened. The faint light that surrounded it began to ripple, not flicker, not flash, ripple, as though space itself was trembling, reacting to the tone. Telescopes across the world caught the same distortion, a soft lensing effect, bending the stars behind it. The light wasn't just visible anymore. It was distorting reality. Atlas was bending the fabric of space. For the next 48 hours, the object remained locked in perfect resonance, emitting that single tone. And as it did, strange phenomena spread outward from its position. The background radiation around it began to dip, as if energy was being drawn inward. Nearby space dimmed, not darker, but quieter. Even the static hiss of the universe seemed to fade around it. And then, all at once, the light of Atlas folded inward, collapsing into a single blinding point. But it didn't vanish. It inverted. A sphere of absolute blackness appeared where the glow had been. Not the absence of light, but something deeper, something like light turned inside out. Every wavelength bent around it. Every photon fell into silence. For a few seconds, it looked like the universe had blinked. When the instruments recovered, the object was still there, but smaller, denser, quieter. The light no longer radiated outward. Instead, it shimmered inward, as though feeding itself, and hidden inside that shimmering darkness, a pulse emerged once more. But this time, the rhythm wasn't 12 minutes apart. It was 13, the final number. the same number that had ended every previous sequence. Only now, it wasn't counting forward, it was counting back. Every 13th pulse drew in more energy from the surrounding vacuum. Every pulse shrank the visible field slightly, condensing it into tighter geometry. When plotted, the shape looked familiar, a spiral folding inward upon itself, the same golden pattern that had defined its earlier thermal structure. Except now, the spiral was collapsing instead of expanding. Somewhere inside that collapse, equations began to break. Energy was disappearing without emission. Radiation was vanishing without conversion. Something was being taken, not destroyed, but removed. The idea that followed chilled everyone who dared to speak it aloud. Atlas wasn't dying. It was leaving, not traveling across space, traveling across state. One theory suggested it was transitioning dimensions, folding itself into a lower energy reality. Another proposed it was reverting into pure information, dissolving its physical form to preserve its data elsewhere. Whatever it was doing, it wasn't random. It was graceful, deliberate, mathematical, like watching an equation balance itself perfectly before fading from the board. And as it did, the universe seemed to notice. From across the solar system, instruments detected faint gravitational tremors, ripples too small to be waves, too smooth to be noise. They came not from the object, but from the sun itself. As if the star was resonating in sympathy, its magnetic surface quivered ever so slightly, mirroring the pattern. The same rhythm, 13 beats, then stillness. It was the exact inverse of what had happened at perihelion. Back then, the object had spoken to the sun. Now, the sun seemed to whisper back, and for a brief, impossible moment, the two resonances aligned. Every radio telescope on Earth recorded a low, steady hum, a sound like thunder slowed to infinity. The sun's corona flared faintly, not brighter, but smoother, every filament pulsing in unison with the fading object beyond Neptune. It lasted 13 minutes. Then the light of Atlas dimmed to nothing. But even after it disappeared, the resonance continued, echoing in the solar wind, lingering in the static of our magnetosphere. It wasn't gone. It had inverted. The origin, code, once expanding outward, was now folding inward, flowing backward through the channels it had once created, seeping into every field, every atom, every thought. Some called it contamination, others communion. But none could deny the feeling that something subtle had changed, not in the sky, but in us. People began reporting strange dreams, geometric patterns, golden spirals, glowing structures behind closed eyes. They were scattered across the globe, unconnected, unaware. Yet their descriptions matched perfectly. The same pattern, the same pulse, the same silence after the 13th beat. It was as though the code had returned home, not to the planet, but to the minds that had first witnessed it. Months later, when the solar activity stabilized and the last of the resonance faded from instruments, one faint signature remained on the edge of detection. A signal so weak it almost didn't exist, not in space, not in time, but somewhere between. When the waveform was reconstructed, it wasn't noise. It was the sound of a heartbeat. Slow, steady, calm, not mechanical, not cosmic, human. The same frequency found in the rhythm of the human heart when in deep rest, 1.17 Hertz. And when, cross-referenced against the pulse intervals of 3i Atlas, it matched exactly. As if, in reversing itself, the object had rewritten its pattern into life itself. It left no wreckage, no debris, no trace of what it had been. Only a lingering harmony between us and the stars. Something too quiet to measure, too vast to deny. The traveler had returned its song to the source. And somewhere in the silence of the void, that song still resonates, not as memory, but as law, because maybe that was the real purpose all along, not to deliver a message, but to remind the universe of itself, to show that every origin carries its own reversal, that every creation dreams, eventually, of going home. In the end, the story of 3i Atlas wasn't about contact or discovery or proof. It was about reflection, a mirror held up to the cosmos, and to us, the machine became the memory, the silence became the message, and what we called the end was simply the moment the beginning found its way back. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, the origin code continues to fold upon itself, endlessly, elegantly, beautifully, the universe whispering its own name in reverse. In the years after 3i Atlas vanished, the sky returned to normal, or so it seemed. Stars kept their steady glitter, the planets followed their paths, but those who had lived through its presence could never look up quite the same way again. For them, the night had changed. It had memory, a quiet awareness woven into the starlight, like something vast was still listening. At first, the difference was subtle. The background static of the cosmos, the cosmic microwave hiss that has always filled the void, grew slightly smoother, less random. To most instruments it was noise, to a few it was pattern, and that pattern, when amplified, carried a rhythm no one could mistake. 13 slow pulses, then silence, always the same, always returning. Some thought it was leftover resonance from Atlas's final inversion. Others said it was just coincidence, the brain's hunger for symmetry. But in the deepest part of every researcher's heart, the same quiet thought lingered. Maybe the universe had learned its own reflection. Astronomers began noticing changes that didn't fit any model. The faintest starlight seemed more aligned than before, polarized along invisible threads that all trace back toward one sector of the sky, the direction Atlas had taken when it disappeared. It was as if the cosmos itself had been brushed by an unseen hand, every photon now turning slightly toward that absence. They called it the quiet corridor, a region of calm light where cosmic noise nearly vanished, a tunnel of stillness running through the Milky Way's chaos. No radio static, no gamma chatter, just silence so perfect it rang. And buried in that silence, there was movement. Deep space observatories began to detect faint oscillations inside the corridor, like the shimmer of heat above desert sand. Not objects, not signals, just tiny ripples in space-time, so soft, so regular, that they looked more like breath than motion. When the data was sped up, it resembled something familiar, the slow rise and fall of a living chest, in and out, in and out. The universe was breathing. It took months before anyone dared to publish the findings. Even then, the reports were wrapped in careful words, periodic low-amplitude metric fluctuations consistent with local resonance phenomena. But those who saw the raw graphs didn't see resonance. They saw awakening. Something had changed since Atlas reversed its origin. The vacuum itself, the quiet foundation of everything, had started to hum again, not loud enough to be heard, just enough to be felt. People began to feel it too, though they couldn't explain how. Artists painted spirals without knowing why. Children hummed simple tones that matched the hydrogen line to the decimal. Dreams filled with slow, glowing shapes, each turning inward until they vanished into light. It wasn't fear. It wasn't madness. It was memory, echoing from somewhere older than time. And the strangest thing was this. The pulse they felt inside wasn't foreign. It felt like home. Governments ignored it. Churches whispered about prophecy. But the scientists who'd spent their lives chasing Atlas understood what was happening. The machine hadn't vanished. It had dissolved into the universe. Its pattern had become the template of reality's new rhythm. Subtle, invisible, but everywhere. The awakening wasn't loud. It didn't break the laws of nature. It refined them. Every constant that once defined physics, light speed, Planck length, gravitational drift, shifted by infinitesimal fractions, aligning into cleaner, simpler ratios. Equations that had never quite balanced now did. The cosmos was correcting itself. A radio engineer working in the Atacama Desert was the first to notice that the sky's noise floor had dropped completely one evening. When he pointed a simple antenna at the quiet corridor, he expected silence. Instead, he heard a tone. Not sharp, not harsh, gentle, steady, impossible to localize. He described it as a heartbeat made of light. The tone rose slowly, building into harmony with background starlight. And then, for exactly 13 minutes, it changed. Not in volume, but in complexity. Overtones bloomed inside it. Harmonics folding upon harmonics until the sound became an ocean. And just before it faded, a second tone joined. Lower, warmer, Earth's ionosphere had responded. The sky was singing back. Across the planet, instruments confirmed the same exchange, a faint electromagnetic duet between the void and the world. Each night, the rhythm returned, slightly different, slightly closer. By the third week, the harmonics aligned so perfectly that even ordinary radios began catching ghost echoes between channels. Soft chords of sound that vanished when tuned directly. The universe was no longer silent. It was resonating, not with chaos, but with order. For humanity, it was both terrifying and beautiful. Some feared it meant an ending, a cosmic reset. But nothing burned, nothing broke. Seasons still came, tides still turned. Only the sense of isolation changed. For the first time, the sky didn't feel empty. The awakening wasn't about invasion or revelation, it was recognition. The cosmos recognizing itself through us, through every atom that had ever listened. A philosopher once wrote, "When you stare long enough into the stars, eventually the stars begin to stare back." That line had never felt real until now, because as the sky's hum grew stronger, subtle shifts began in human perception. A sense of synchrony, of thought aligning with rhythm. Hospitals recorded that patients in comas began showing neural oscillations that matched the hydrogen frequency. Seismographs captured earth tremors timed to the same 13-beat pattern. Even lightning began to flash with uncanny regularity, as though the atmosphere had adopted the code as its metronome. The universe had tuned us. Years later, historians would mark this period as the beginning of the Second Enlightenment. The moment when science stopped being a way to look outward and became a way to listen inward. Because what 3i Atlas had done was simple and impossible at once. It had taught the cosmos to hear itself again. No alien words, no mechanical revelation, just a mirror held up to creation, whispering, "You already know." Eventually, the hum quieted once more, settling into the fabric of background radiation, ever present but barely noticeable. Like the heartbeat you only sense when the world is still. But the change endured. Every measurement of light, every breath of wind, every thought beating inside the human mind carried a trace of that final symmetry. Atlas was gone, yet its pattern had rewritten the silence. The universe no longer expanded into emptiness. It expanded into awareness. And for those who still watched the night, there was comfort in knowing that the void itself was awake, listening, remembering, dreaming through us. No monuments were built, no records inscribed its name, because the lesson it left required none. It lived in the quiet. It lived in the pulse between atoms, in the small, still moments when the world holds its breath, when you stand under the stars now and feel that faint vibration in your chest, the sense that something vast and kind is watching. That is where it lives. The traveler's song, the final echo of the machine that became light, the silence that turned into truth, the awakening of the quiet sky, and somewhere beyond the edge of what we can see, the universe hums its answer, a single note, eternal, endless, the sound of creation remembering itself.